Hey everyone, and welcome back to Think, Engage, Thrive. Another episode, another week where we bring you another innovative entrepreneur. Tonight, we have a gentleman named Andres Klaric, and he is the co-founder and co-CEO of Fuse Financial. And they're a next generation loan origination system that simplifies lending for financial institutions. So I don't think it's consumer focused. I think it's B2B financial institution focused. And they built it. He's got a great background, Harvard MBA, was working on Wall Street, several different banks, private equity, venture capital, etc. And great background and an interesting business. We're always trying to bring something different rather than just the same old, whether it's somebody building a brand and doing those types of things. So let's bring him in and we'll talk about his story. We'll talk about his background and we'll get to know him and understand his business a bit. And so, Andres, how are you? Thank you for being here and welcome.
Hey Phil, how are you? Thanks for having me tonight.
Yeah, good. Good. So, why don't you take us through sort of your journey to Fuse, how you got there, why you got there, what was the inspiration, what you were doing in the past, and how it got what your whole path was to get you there.
Yeah, I guess connecting the dots, I little by little, right? So Fuse first started as a consumer lender, right? So how did we land in that space? We looked at a lot of like lending products, personal loans, credit cards, auto loans, and my background from years before was in the auto space. My grandfather was a race car driver. My
Oh,
dad has worked at in auto finance for a good number of years, and my first job out of high school was selling cars. So I had like a little bit of an affinity for the auto space, and then I spent like those summers selling cars at a dealership in Northern Virginia, and just that paid for school. Then I spent 10 years on Wall Street. My first set of banking experiences was helping banks, insurance companies, and things like that. Kind of like when fintech was just credit cards. And after my years on Wall Street, I switched into the investing side. I was an investor in tech and business services, so like companies like what we are today. And then I quickly transition into like more focus on just like distressed credit and that kind of stuff. Along the way, I went to Harvard for my MBA. That's where I met my co-founder almost 10 years ago, and kind of stayed in touch with him. You might have seen him in the background. And this we started speaking in 2020 during the pandemic. I was kind of telling him, hey, like I'm thinking about this idea. What do you think? Right? He's a repeat co-founder, founder, and he said, I like the idea, but you should probably like think about better the presentation. So that kind of like process of bouncing ideas turned into like the equivalent of founder dating, and he kind of fell in love with the idea too. We kind of made the idea together better. And the first iteration of the product was direct to consumer lending. What we didn't know is that by virtue of building the tech engine behind that was powering that loan processor, we had actually started Fuse, right? Like it was not something that we knew at that moment. And lenders starting approaching us, telling us, out of curiosity, guys, how is it that that you're doing this thing so fast? We see no mistakes, and that translated little by little into them asking us, hey, like we actually want to buy software from you rather than loans. So that's kind of like
hmm.
the quick story on Fuse.
That's pretty interesting. Your grandfather was what kind of race car driver was your grandfather?
I mostly rallies, right? Like I think the enduro, that kind of stuff. I mean, this is the 50s, right? Like they didn't even have like protective cages. It was like driving like a coffin. So I think he quickly quit in the 50s. He might have met my grandma, and it was the end of the story. But I think my entire family has an extreme passion for cars, right? I personally find it super amusing, and also I love the fact that America has fallen in love with sports like Formula One, right? Because I grew up watching it through the 90s and 2000s and 2010s, and yeah, just it's a beautiful machine.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I love cars. I'm very much a car person. So you had this idea for Fuse, and it really everything starts with some sort of pain point. What pain point did you see before
Yeah,
you had other banks are approaching you?
yeah. The biggest pain point we saw is this doesn't only apply to like financial institutions, right? It's automation, right? Reality is that a lot of interactions were originally designed for like branch interactions or in-person interactions. So the technological the systems were not in place to actually make it very intuitive and fast to do this online, right? Of course, the internet came, everyone knows that part. But the what the systems try to replicate was that kind of in-branch experience, where in reality, like that was actually changing, right? So
Right.
when you think about Uber, Airbnb, all of this, they kind of dictated what the customer experience should be when you're not in branch, right? And financial institutions were missing that, right? That they were, for example, you will apply for a loan and they will ask you to like take pictures of your uh, um, pay stubs, and there would be all this added friction of like, hey, I need to confirm this, or they will ask you 50 times the same thing in the same application, right? So you'd say, hey, like, let's really remove the friction of the application process. Let's get as soon as possible to a yes or no decision for that particular borrower, and let's make the process of collecting all the information we need as clear as possible so that person can actually have an idea of what's going to be required for them. And guess what? Also, all the things that you had to send via email or like PDFs and things like that. Today, there's like API connectivity or connect via tools that allow you to do that via like credentialing versus like you having to like pile together uh, all the information like the way that you do with taxes, right? Just
Yeah,
really
yeah,
minimize that. So we saw that pain point. Also, kind of drawing a landscape of the market, most of the incumbents in the space uh, uh, had not really innovated in like 10, 20 years. And they were charging astronomical prices for what they do versus the value they create for the partners. They were effectively more like consulting shops than tech shops, right? So we came with a new, fresher approach. And little by little, we recognize the fact that they are formidable competitors, but at the same time that we have a better product today.
yeah. It's true. It every time we buy a car, we had to get one recently for my son who has just graduated college and he's starting his life. And it amazes me how much paperwork there is involved in doing that. And in this day and age, I think to myself, it seems so cumbersome, you know.
Yeah.
Um, but anyway, so you went to Harvard. We talked about this a little bit, and we talked about the role and how do you think the MBA from Harvard influenced your entrepreneurial journey and the creation of Fuse?
Yeah. I mean, it gave me my co-founder, right? So from that perspective, the Harvard investment paid itself many times over. Um, I wouldn't describe necessarily like the MBA, at least for me, right? It might differ for other folks, but uh, from an academic standpoint, I don't think most people kind of utilize that experience as like, oh, the same way that like someone perhaps apply, like a very nerdy kid will apply themselves in high school or in
Yeah,
college,
yeah,
right? Like I would describe much more as a heavy networking environment. Really, I mean, I went with a bunch of millennials. I'm a millennial, right? So it's very experiential. So you get to know people, you travel with people, and from my perspective, I did not necessarily go to Harvard thinking I'm going to become an entrepreneur one day.
yeah,
Uh, if anything, I got lucky and incredibly lucky, I must say, right? So um, everyone kind of has their own expectation of what you go into Harvard, but I would say if you think you're going to learn that much in the classroom, I think you should really lower your expectations. I think what the real learnings are going to come through the years of with all the people that you meet and that you stay in touch with, like those friendships. That's kind of like the important part. So if you don't go to Harvard, the key thing is like finding environments in which you have similar-minded people in terms of like the level of ambition, the curiosity, uh, and things like that. I'm sure that Harvard is trying to find its own way of how to uh, reinvent themselves in the face of like the internet, artificial intelligence, and all of things like that. That like dilute to some extent that experience, that in-person experience, or components of what that education experience might be for the next 100 years.
Yeah, I agree with you. As I said to you before, when I got my MBA, I did it. I went to back to school after my first business, which was just a disaster. And I've talked about it on this show many times. And I didn't go because I thought it was going to solve my problems or fix me. I went because I thought I needed to think differently, or I needed something, which I think it gave me. It just gave me the ability to think differently. And I met a lot of great people at the university, and I still keep in touch with a lot of them. And I think it got me some opportunities that put me on a path to entrepreneurship afterwards, between the contacts that I made, and things like that. And I'm still active in the school because the school has a very good entrepreneurial program, and it has, it fosters a lot of entrepreneurial programs, and I mentor some young entrepreneurs there. So I love it, but I think you're right. If you're expecting to go into an MBA program and get all this knowledge from the academic side of it, I don't think you're going to get it.
Yeah, yeah, no, it's not a panacea, but it's that first step on like self improvement, on like really wanting to like get to the next stage in your career. So
Yeah.
it's from other people as like teaching themselves how to code. It comes in switching jobs. There's that step up that you're searching in your life, and it manifests itself differently. But I the MBA doesn't hurt. Like
No.
that's that it's better than neutral. Let's put it that
Yeah. Yeah.
way.
Yeah. So now you pivoted. You started out consumer lending, focused on consumers, and you pivoted now to just supplying software. Is that
Yep.
what? So to whom? How does that whole piece?
Banks. So it was, the nice thing is that it was not like a hard pivot that like we were selling something and then we became a coffee company. That we we went. It was the same set of customers, right? Instead of selling them loans, we started selling them software, right? So there was not this like hard transition in which, hey Phil, goodbye. Uh, I am not going to be able to provide you. I'm never going to see you again, right? It
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
more like, hey Phil, I noticed that you live in the East Coast. Would you be interested in like perhaps catching up in the next couple of weeks? I have an idea for a East Coast business that you think I think you'll be very productive for you, right? And they kind of, and most of them actually initiated the conversations themselves. They asked us, right? Where did you get this shirt, for example, right? And they were like, oh, they. So that's how you kind of. It was a very natural conversation. It was, we were lucky, right? It's not. I didn't. It's not that I did it, and my co-founder did anything like genius. It was, we are lucky that we landed in a market
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
was hungry for that solution, and I think where we didn't get lucky was in the fact that we built a pretty good product that people wanted.
Yeah. Yeah. That's pretty interesting. I can understand it's not a hard pivot. But it's it's probably a
Still a
bit.
pivot.
Yeah, still a pivot, and it's probably easier to sell software than to originate consumer loans, I would think.
it it's it's different. I would say, as far as the deal velocity goes, selling loans, I mean, it's pretty easy compared to like selling a large enterprise deal, right? But I would say on the consumer side, the hard thing is you're selling to everyone. So there's this level of dilution of who the person is. It's like, you know, that you're changing someone else's life, you just don't know who, right? So for someone, at least myself, that I had spent 10 years like meeting with boards, uh, business leaders, and kind of like going to dinner and getting and understanding businesses in detail, the becoming like too mass market kind of diluted my ability to like really empathize with the customer, right? Like, and I think like people that are in consumer, like, are geniuses at like really understanding like the broad spectrum of folks.
Sure.
I think now that we've gone back to like B2B enterprise, it kind of brings back that face of people, right? Like, you understand who they are, whether their expectations are. You spend more time with them, right? The consideration of the from a price standpoint is way higher. So and this is like buying committees, not just like taking a credit card that takes 5 minutes. This is like, hey, like, this is probably one of the largest projects we've undergone in the last 5 years, and we want to make sure that we trust you, and did you understand all the fears that we have as an organization, right? Like, so all of that is are components that I enjoy way more. I enjoy being on the road. I enjoy showing them the platform, and just building a relationship that it transcends just like the business relationship.
Sure.
Just laughing about things, really seeing the impact that it has on their careers. They get promoted. They're pretty happy with they are. They recommend you. It is a pretty fun trajectory. Not saying the consumer is bad. It's just like, for me, it was just harder to relate to the customer.
Yeah. Well, I've spent most of my career focused, and every single startup I've built is focused on the consumer. So that's something that I understand tremendously. You know, I understand consumers and how they think and how they walk and how they talk and how they work. So for me, you know, B2B is a little bit more difficult. So, but I understand it. I understand what you're saying. It's great. So what are some of the biggest challenges? Everybody's got challenges when they're building something. What are some of the challenges that you faced, and what did you do to overcome them?
Yeah, I would say we have a distributed team, right? So like that in itself is hard, right? Like being able to organize, keep each other communicated, motivated, right? Like different time zones, different parts of the country. That I think it's something that like we learn to navigate by virtue of creating venues for people to like discuss, creating multiple times touch points per year in which we meet in person. And I think we were clear eyed when we got into this setup, that the pros and cons, and overall has allowed us to attract talent that is delivering at the highest level, right? That as an organization is not unique to Fuse, but at least for most of us, probably none of us came from a distributed world before we started building Fuse. So it's been a learning curve, and that in itself was it's something that we continue to try to improve. But we're very happy. Hopefully, like when we're like twice, 3, 4, 10x bigger than we are today, maybe the merits of actually having certain hubs will start showing up. But for the time being, I think that strategy has allowed the strategy that we have today has allowed us to scale quite well.
Yeah. We built a skincare brand or beauty brand back in the early 2000s. And because of the way that we built it on primarily the shopping channels, HSN in Florida, the shopping channel in Canada, Italy, London. We were always on the road. And so we actually built the business as a fragmented business. We had no office because we were never in an office. We were always on the road, and we had our manufacturer, and we had, you know, the fulfillment for, you know, e-commerce and things like that. And so we learned quite well how to manage a disparate team because everybody was in a different place. And so by the time COVID hit, we were already doing it. We were champs at it. We had an office, like Crunch Growth had an office, but it was, nobody, I never went to it. I just wasn't a fan. I'm just not a fan of going to the office, but I understand what you're saying. And it's definitely a talent, but today there's so many tools that enable you to manage a team that's, in different places. So I think, I understand when you say, when we get to 10X, we'll have, we might have little satellite offices, and that would work. So
Yeah, there'll be champagne problems there.
yeah. those are the problems you want to figure out how to solve.
Exactly. You would love those problems.
Yeah. So a little bit about the business again. Is it are you working in an environment where there's sort of regulatory control, or
Also,
is it that you have to deal with? Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. Like, so our customers are like lenders, right? Like banks, credit unions, finance companies, and they rely on us and other partners to be able to, like, hey, like, we're getting audited. Like, we need to provide all the records of whenever this, especially consumer lending, right, is super regulated, right?
Yeah.
So it's a big barrier to entry for other players. Uh, but once you kind of clear those hurdles, it creates a defensible moat for us as a business.
Is that right?
Yeah. So if anything, I learned early on in my career that complexity is something that you should embrace because it creates defensibility. Because not everyone wants to go through the hurdle of understanding something, and that kind of dissuades people from kind of wanting to do something, right? So also the market, the industry that we're in is inherently, you can describe it as dry, and that also dissuades people from actually coming. And I'm very grateful, right? Because I think most founders out there, especially like younger founders, kind of get the shiny thing, right? And they run
Oh,
to it.
sure.
And the initial business, usually, like, whenever you speak with friends or family they're trying to start a business, they always have that kind of, that very idea that it just is very surface level, right? And I think as you kind of understand that the ideas are pretty cheap, you start really embracing how incredible of a moat the boring, what you could perceive as boring and complex could actually be. And those are like the most defensible businesses.
Yeah, that's the more complex. Yes, the more complex it is. I wouldn't
Yeah.
say that the more boring is defensible, because I have a friend who has he has a business where he does they do bookkeeping for businesses. They have another one that does uh, I forget, just boring businesses.
Yeah.
But it's easy the way
Yeah.
that they have it set up. It's very but it's very profitable and lucrative.
Yeah.
And but I think anybody could do it with. They use a lot of virtual assistants. They use a lot of people overseas, and
Yeah.
uh, but it is funny. But I think complex businesses, yes, you're complex and boring could be
Yeah.
a very defensible position. But I don't
Yeah.
think it's so boring. That particular business, banking in general. I'm not so sure that that's necessarily boring, but
It's super. It is complex though, right? And it's, I would
yeah,
say,
it's very complex.
infrastructure software tends to be very technical too, right? So uh, it's a Venn diagram that becomes very small quickly,
Yeah,
and and that in itself, it requires a unique set of talent, right, and
sure.
motivation, and you, whenever you're selling, you're selling to a very specific person, right? It's someone within the bank that really cares about this. The other 99% of the bank doesn't even know that that piece of software exists, right?
Yeah. Well, selling in general is I think it's difficult. I think it's difficult to be positive about selling. I was never good at selling, and as we started this business, Crunch Growth, I've had to sell, and I understand. Let me rephrase that. I've always been good at selling to consumers because I can understand how to write an ad, or I can understand how to do something or position something so that it's going to interest the consumer.
Yeah.
But having to sell B2B or having to sell services to people, like you said, some of them, there's probably 1% of the people within an organization that really care or
Yeah.
give a darn, right? The rest of the people don't really want to hear about it.
Yeah.
And so it's difficult. And sometimes it's difficult to hear the negatives or the
Yeah.
naysayers. That's always hard I think on your psyche. So
Yeah, no, yeah, of course, it can be devastating, right? Like I was listening to a podcast on how uh, certain account executives or like sales teams or like B2B companies, like they can get burned out, right? Like and once you get in that mindset of it's this psychological mindset of being actually good at selling, right? And if you start losing that faith in your capabilities, you can get jaded pretty quickly, right?
yeah,
So and yes, it's full of no's, right? That's why it's very important to understand who your customer is, right? So at least you're getting no's from the right people, because if you're getting no's from people that are just not the decision makers, then you're going to believe that you're going to convince yourself that you're in the wrong market, because
right.
most people are going to say no. 98% of the funnel is not even looking for this, right? So you need to be very good at like the folks that are decision makers, and do you get to them and do you provide value, right? As opposed to consumer consumer sales, B2B really it's all about consultative. It's that relationship building. It takes time, right? It's really a patient approach. You kind of become, it's kind of borrowing the analogy of like HBS. You actually need to learn here, right? You need to be excel. Like it's from an academic standpoint, it's the most rigorous experience of your life to like do B2B enterprise, because you become obsessive, right? Like not only like with the pain points of the business, you understand kind of like the lives of your clients. They become your friends, right? Obviously, like they're not your
Sure.
family, but like they become your friends, and you get to know them. You actually care about them, right? Because you spend so much time with them that you feel invested in them like succeeding, and even if the deal doesn't go through, right, at that point you just wish them well, right, because they've spent so much time with you to figure things out, that you respect their decision, whichever the way goes, because you give it your all, they give it their all too.
Sure. Yeah, I can understand that. We feel like that about our clients that we work with
Mm.
because you're on the phone with them so much,
Yeah.
you're talking to them so much, you're invested in their business and the success because you're working hard to make their business successful with what they've charged you with.
Yeah.
And you're right, it becomes they become almost your friend. You're talking to them so often that it does become that kind of a relationship. I had a friend many years ago when I was in the retail business. I owned retail stores, and we had buyers and people, merchandisers and things, and we used to have salesmen call on us to sell us, food products or, whatever. And there was this guy. His name was Ted, and he was a sales guy, and he represented several different lines of products, and he would bring things in and we would look at it sometimes and just say it's not right, no, sorry. And he was always so positive about it. It was like, no big deal, man. I understand exactly what you're saying. And even if you gave him a no, right, a negative, and he'd come back 2 weeks later because I heard what you said, I understood what you said, why that product wasn't good, but this product is good and it's going to work for you,
Yeah.
and I just thought that was such a good attitude that even the negative he pulled a positive out of.
Yeah. And they learning in active listeners, right? uh the and there's a lot of ways that you can become better at it, right? Like now with technology, you can record your calls, you can
Yeah.
see like what it's incredible the science of it is increasingly good at, right? Like, and the psychology of it. And I'm very excited about how how technology is going to continue helping us build better relationships, right? Like, obviously there's been negatives in the last 20 years in social media. There's like mental health and everything for people, but like, as far as sales goes, I think that it's really helping people like drive value for customers. Uh, all the tools you have out there.
Oh yeah, yeah, it's amazing. We were talking about this morning on a call. The amount of change that's occurred in the last 2 years or 3 years with technology, and it's the point where you're still learning every day. You're still learning how to use some of these tools, especially with AI. You know, we've been using AI products for years, but now all of a sudden you basically have these tools that can take raw data and extrapolate that data out in minutes. What used to take us days to
Yeah.
figure out. I can load a spreadsheet with 150 columns and and 1,000 rows, and put it through these data manipulators with AI, and it'll spit me out at least some semblance of knowledge that's useful and actionable in a matter of minutes.
Yeah. Yeah, like lists for like email campaigns, or just connect the dots on all these accounts or prepare Excel spreadsheet. It is incredible that we are at that. I mean, I was too young when the internet came out. Of course, I remember it, but I was like an 8, 9 year old, and it's exciting to actually now be at the forefront and see what artificial intelligence is going to do for us and for humanity as a whole, right? I'm excited. I of course recognize that there's a lot of things that unanswered questions that we should ask. But as a whole, it's an incredible, an exciting time to be alive.
Yeah, it's a great tool if it's used correctly.
No.
But like, for us, we run a lot of ads, and we have years and years and years worth of history for some companies. And a friend of mine built this quick widget, which in Python, that he basically built on a GPT, and it just extrapolates this data and tells us how to refine the ad very quickly. And I mean, it's clunky. It was something he built, but it was something that we tested that was just phenomenal. So
Yeah.
And we didn't have that. Like I said, I mean, we would have to look at that data, and it would take us a long time to try and figure out what the data is telling us, what the actionable steps are out of it. And now you can do it, quite quickly. So
Yeah. And I'm a big believer that AI is not going to take away our jobs, but if you don't use AI in your job, then you should expect your job to be taken away. So that it, it is. I think everyone out there should be becoming a practitioner as much as
yeah,
possible.
yeah. So we were talking a little bit before about about entrepreneurship and startups. What advice do you have for other entrepreneurs looking to innovate? It doesn't just have to be in your sector,
Yeah.
just anywhere.
I mean, I have like the more tactical stuff at first. Always like when you're starting to start a business, set up an LLC or a C corp, get the insurance. Like, those are like the blocking and tackling that I think every founder should take. Then set a timeline, right? That's also tactical. I always recommend against people that are, oh, we will figure it out, and they don't set a timeline by when they want to be done with their search or idea exploration. It's not only having the financial wherewithal, but also like saying like, hey, if in a year or two, like, there's nothing that has come up or nothing sticks of the things that we tried, it's okay to quit, right? Like, just don't do it because of the lifestyle, because the lifestyle sucks, right? Like, it's a lot of uncertainty. You are not going to be Elon Musk, right? Yeah, most certainly. Like, there's just one, and just do it because of you actually want it, because you actually find something that that it starts getting traction. Because once it starts getting traction is when like the most of the learning kind of starts happening, right? So really narrow down to ideas as quick as possible, and like let the best idea win. Even if that idea is not necessarily your passion, you'll become very passionate about the problem. Right? Don't get obsessed with the solution, right? A lot of people are like, oh yeah, I want solutions, right? And that's kind of what a lot of people criticize about certain markets, like cryptocurrencies was one of those, right? Like there's a solution, let's find the problems. Whereas I think it's far more enjoyable to like become obsessed with the problem. And I would say the best founders out there, what I'm saying is not necessarily unique, but the obsession with problems and problem solving is what really sets you apart, right? Because you're going to realize that that journey of problem solving is what I would describe as addictive. Whereas if what you're trying is to just search for, you have this solution, you're obsessed to selling the solution. I don't think that doesn't sound that fun to me.
Yeah. I have a friend who early on had built a very good customer retention program for retail. They did quite well. They sold it. And he was trying to figure out what he wanted to do next. And he did similar to what you were talking about. He got himself a small shared office. He went in there and he wrote on the whiteboard the 10 biggest problems he thought could be solved by technology. And he gave himself a 2-year timeline and said, if I can't figure out one of these to bring to market for a product that solves one of these problems, then I'll just give it up and I'll go and, go back to my house and pet my dog. And he wound up coming up with a business that solves a problem for consumers with short-term rentals, not quite like Airbnb, but similar, especially mostly focused on vacation type things. And he's doing quite well now, but he did the same thing. And that was a problem. It wasn't so much the same as Airbnb, but it was a problem in the fact that when you get multiple families together that go out and lease these houses for the summer, they always wind up with problems, and it's very tedious to deal with landlords and things like that. And similar to you, they came up with a product that automates it all, gets everybody together on the same page so that they can execute, and in some cases purchase the property. So as multiple families purchasing, a vacation home. So
like a timeshare for a reduced amount of folks.
yeah,
that's amazing.
Yeah. So he did, it was the same type of thing. He gave himself a timeline. He put the problems that he thought he could solve. He started trying to look at each one and then decided that this was the one he was going to focus on.
Yeah, it brings discipline, knowing that we live finite lives, right? So everything should be, even the, we all know we're going to die. So at some point you might as well just treat, the idea, at least the idea generation phase. I love the idea of building a business that outlives me, but the business needs to be alive first, right?
Yeah, sure.
You need to bring it to life, right? So that's kind of what what I recommend folks the most part. Just set a time bound for like that process of actually ideation.
Yeah. But it's true what you said before about sometimes young entrepreneurs, they look for the shiny thing. I mentor a lot of young entrepreneurs, and I never try and tell anybody that their idea is a bad one, because that's not the right thing to do. But you try and guide them into thinking about it differently and making sure that they studied the market, because sometimes they come in, not only do they have a half-baked idea, but that wasn't really researched, but they also think that they're going to put together a 10-page deck, go out, pitch it, and walk away with a check for $10 million. And you have to bring that down to reality quick, because it's just that's not going to happen.
Yeah. Well, in America, there's a little bit of a small sliver of opportunity that perhaps that happens in terms of like getting the money. But I can assure you, in no other country, the US at least some folks can pull it off. In other, and it's fantasy, but fantasy, some people in other places it's just impossible. Like
Yeah.
you need to tell that person you are out of your mind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. In this country, I've seen people do it. I mean,
Yeah.
I've had friends who've gone
Yeah.
in and raised capital on an idea, but
Yeah.
the idea is well thought out. The idea
Exactly.
actually has a very good foundation,
Yeah.
and they've generally got some sort of connection with
Yeah.
the people that they're talking to, you know.
Yeah. And then the reason why the deck is 10 pages is not because the idea was poor, but because they actually started with 100 pages and they
Yeah.
reduced it to 10. Like there's like this Cicero quote, right? Like I don't know the exact wording. Well, I don't know it because he was not writing in English. He was probably writing in Latin. And but what it says it's along the lines of like, had I had more time, I would have written a shorter letter.
Yeah.
Uh, it's apologies for the long letter. I just didn't have enough time. And
Yeah.
I think that's true.
Yeah. Yeah. You want to nobody wants to sit there and listen to
Yeah.
pitches that, and you were in venture capital or private equity. Nobody wants to sit and listen to a pitch that's 20 pages long and you go and it drones on. You
Yeah.
want somebody who's got the concept. And
Yeah. DocSend has very good information on this, on the average amount of time spent on a early stage deck, and I think it's under 2 minutes.
yeah. Yeah.
It's so yeah, it's just about. But yeah, I agree with you. Most folks think it's like they have 2 beers and they think that they just came up with the greatest idea, and within that fantasy world, right? Because you hear like Seinfeld came up with Seinfeld
Yeah.
in a grocery shop. Yeah, that's a comedy show, and there were like 10 years of work before that, right?
Yeah.
It's not that it came up in 15 minutes. Like,
Yeah.
there's a lot of preparation.
They should say they finalized the idea in about 2
Eh,
minutes, but the
Yeah,
whole concept of the idea,
yeah,
uh, yeah, I've been through that myself, and raising capital for businesses is a very difficult thing to do. It's time consuming. What you really want to do is have a business that generates cash so that you don't need to raise money.
exactly. I think in the 2020, 2021 easy money era, like raising money was the goal itself. That was kind of success. And
Sure.
that's just money, right? Like that, and it's not even your money, it's your investors' money, right? It's not that like someone gave you it's money that you need to use appropriately.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a badge of honor for some young entrepreneurs. They think that raising capital, they don't understand the strings attached to that money. When you
Yeah.
especially when you get it from structured capital, private equity or
Yeah.
whatever, it's not as clean cut as you think it is.
Yeah.
We raised capital for a business back, again, it was many years back, but it was a private equity company, and they invested, about 20 million into the business and preferred shares. And obviously that preferred shares had a coupon to them, and it also had warrants for common. And we went through it. Obviously we needed the money, we needed to grow. And then it got to a point where we were going to, we had somebody who was going to buy the business. And at that point we realized that the money that we raised was really just a very expensive loan, because the preferred paid out the original investment plus the percentage interest, but they still got to keep the common for the amount that they invested in. So it was just like a really expensive loan. And I said to myself, I'm never going to do that again at that point. And so the subsequent business that we did, we raised capital from partners that had a vested interest in the business, more strategic capital. And that was just straight equity, which made more sense. Then they had a vested interest in the business, vested interest in helping us grow. And that was sort of how we built that business, and it worked out a lot better. I think strategic capital is more important. Somebody who's going to, money is money, but money that can help you grow, or the group that can help you grow is more important, I think.
No, I agree with you.
Yeah.
It's money's a commodity, right? Like, so it's very important who gives you the money.
Right.
Yeah. Super important.
Yeah. 100%. So we're almost out of time. We're coming up on the end, but we were talking before new family, or you're married, you've got a young baby. How do you? I know when I was doing some of my first businesses, it was a lot of hours and a lot of work. How do you do that? How do you handle that work-life balance?
Well, there's no balance, right? It's just trade-offs, right?
Yeah.
You need to make us and you have very clear conversations at the family level and at the founder level of where the kind of the need, how you split that work, right? Like uh, my wife has decided to spend this year with the baby. I'm incredibly grateful for her for doing that kind of that's taking that decision. And my on my side is I need to grow the business, right? Obviously, I try to make the appropriate amount of time to be a father, and I am sure that I'm going to make my own set of mistakes, hopefully different than the ones my own ones made on us. But it's not easy. But at the same time, life is short, right? And I think that there's a time, and like I felt that the two of us were very ready to take that step and like bring in a new little person into the world. And we're incredibly grateful, right? It's the happiest and most meaningful event you're gonna go through in your life. It kind of overshadow, it kind of like dwarfs all the other events in your life, and it brings in new purpose, a new set of strength. You become way more efficient with your time, and single-handedly the most important thing in the world, right? So it brings a lot of clarity to life.
I like what you said, that it's not work-life balance, it's trade-offs,
Yeah.
because it is true. I never liked the term work-life balance because it's not a balance. It is trade-offs. And I also agree with you about kids. I mean, I loved being a father. I loved having children, and I think it was one of the greatest experiences and one of the most fulfilling experiences.
Yeah, it's incredible.
Yeah, it's
I love every day.
yeah. And it's good that your wife was able to take that year off and spend the time with the child.
Yeah.
I think it's an important time for a child. But it's better that you build a business when they're young than try and do it, when they're at that middle
Yeah.
age. So
No, I think that your 20s and 30s, although like most entrepreneurship happens in the 40s and 50s, at least for myself, I thought that like I really wanted to spend this decade very focused on trying to build something, and like if it works, amazing. If it doesn't, you become much more pragmatic and you just do other things.
well, it sounds like it's working, so I don't think you have to worry so much about that. So I mean, now you just have to keep managing it upward, right?
Yeah,
So
exactly. New
yeah,
problems, new
new
set of
problem.
problems.
Exactly.
Mm.
Well, we're out of time, and I appreciate you coming on. I appreciate you explaining your business. How do people get in touch with you? Let's say if we have, you never know, we might have bankers on this, on watching this, or at some point watching it. How do people get in touch with you? Just go to fusefinancial.com, or
Yeah, they can go to fusefinance.com. That's our website, or reach out to me via LinkedIn. I've had great partners and mentors throughout my life. So in any way I can pay it forward, would love to do that.
okay. Yeah. So we'll put all your information in the description of the show, and the show becomes evergreen content. It'll stay out there, and then next week we do a bit of marketing of the show even after the show airs. So you'll see a couple of things that we'll tag you in next week on LinkedIn and social media and places like that. So it was good having you. I enjoyed the conversation. Good luck with your business. It sounds, it sounds great. It's not something that I would have been able to think of because I don't think in that world. But I give you a lot of credit. It sounds fantastic.
No, thank you so much, Phil. Very kind words, and like thanks for having me here.
Yeah, my pleasure. I have a couple of closing things to do. You can feel free to hang out in the green room. We can catch up afterwards, or you can just get going and get back to your family.
Yeah, I'm gonna try to finish up my day. Do I need to stay a little bit longer for the thing to finish recording? Sometimes they ask me to like just stay a little bit further so the recording is finished.
No, we're not recording it because we're live. So I just
Okay,
have to,
perfect.
Yeah, you can go. I just have a couple of things to finish up, and then you know that's
Awesome.
it. So yeah,
Awesome.
good luck. Have
Thank you
have a
so
good
much.
night. Thanks.
You
Thanks for
too.
taking the time. Right.
Bye bye. Thank you.
Yeah, interesting what he said about his business and his pivot, and going from doing consumer focused on consumer lending to focused on selling software. I think it's an interesting business, not something that I would think of. It's not my forte, but hey, he's they're obviously intelligent guys and they're doing well. um, so we're going to wrap it up, and I appreciate your time. I appreciate you guys coming on, and look for us every week. We have new guests on, and trying to bring you some great entrepreneurs, great advice on what can be done. And have a good night. We're going to wrap it up. Thank you.